I will do a more formal introduction of Judge Tepper, and then I'll turn the presentation over.
You're all set to begin.
Thank you, Kelly. So welcome again to everyone to the third substantive call of the Trauma-Informed Advocacy Work Group. For those of you who are calling in for the first time, this is an initiative of the program to study the latest research on child development and trauma and use the research and information we gather to inform and improve guardian ad litem training, policies, and practices. This is a very important issue to us, and we want everyone to feel free to participate in the question and answer section at the end of the presentation and to provide feedback on the call either to me or to Kelly Rosano. Judge Tepper is a circuit judge in the Florida 6th Judicial Circuit. She recently retired. She has been on the bench for 3 decades and is not only an expert in dependency, but also in the area of trauma-informed courts, on which she teaches, writes, and speaks nationally, including making appearances on Nightline, Oprah Winfrey, and the human trafficking documentary, Too Close to Home. In order to get as much out of this time as we can, I'm going to just leave that as a short introduction of Judge Tepper, except to say that she's fabulous. She's worked so hard for children over her career, and we are very lucky to have her. So, Judge Tepper, I'll turn it over to you.
Well, good afternoon. What a generous introduction, Deb. Thank you very much. I hope everybody can hear me and do some chatting or notes to the online, and they'll let you know if we can fix anything you can't hear. Again, don't forget, mute those phones. I am thrilled to be able to present to the guardian ad litems around the state. Number one, because they have always been my eyes and ears of what I don't know is going on behind the scenes. And number two, because I'm so thrilled that Alan Abramowitz has embraced the significance and the importance of shifting the perspective that we as individuals working with children and families in child welfare, so that our shift allows us to see our child, our families, our parents through a trauma lens. I want you to note this picture that I have, by the way, on the right, that's in my chambers. My chambers is filled with positive messages. But on the left, this is one of the, an adoption day. And by the way, they were not all adopted, but those are 4 brothers. And that is their older sister, who is 20, whose little one is in our early childhood court, and that is the attorney that was their attorney ad litem for several of the children, and then did the adoption for 2 of the boys. When we talk about shifting our perspective, I will talk to you about why it is, how that impacts relationships, both while you're going through the system, but even after you're out of the system. So let's move forward. It is important to stop what I did for decades and shift to a kinder, gentler impression. This is my courtroom, and this is my bailiff. My bailiff is safe, he's appropriate, he knows the histories on everybody coming in. But this is one of our children from early childhood court who just adores him and comes in. Always kiss me goodnight. Life it develops from the positives, from the negatives. These are all in my chambers. This is the message we want to send, that this is a place where you can be heard. This is a place where you can take a deep breath. This is a place where we want to ask you what we can do to help you, whether you're the child or the parent or the non-relative caregiver, or the prospective adoptive parent. And recently, a guardian ad litem from another county wrote me after appearing in court and noted, I'm glad to say, that it was a place where they felt like everybody's needs were being met and everybody was being heard. So that's a shift from simply being an adversarial process. Now, I have my big five for ACEs, adverse childhood experiences approach, and that is we have to see through a trauma lens and understand what it's telling you. And we'll go into that further. And I'm also going to show you the Florida Courts Trauma Toolkit page where you can learn further information and access all national resources. And of course, understand that change is possible. The change for our youth, the one that's frustrating us and running away, the one that's getting picked up for batteries, or a parent that seems oblivious to the needs of their children. Because in the end, if we can reunify, we have to get that child to a safe place sooner rather than later. And sometimes that's with a biological parent, sometimes it isn't. But we have to recognize the possibility of change. And what trumps adversity, what trumps adverse childhood experiences is resilience, is hope, is relationships. And there are things, even as a guardian ad litem volunteer or as a guardian ad litem attorney, that you can do in how you approach what your work is in the court and out of the court, and what requests can be made through counsel. And of course, you work with other guardian ad litems. I know we always have new guardian ad litems coming on board and sitting in court with our experienced guardian ad litems. We have some staff folks. We need to be sharing information on trauma, on resiliency, on healing, and continue to educate ourselves. I know a whole lot more than I knew when I started as a circuit judge 30 years ago. As I say to individuals I may run into in my small community, when they say, "Aren't you Judge Tepper? Do you remember me? I'm 34 now. You saw me when I was 16. And I'll say, "I'm sorry, I'm much kinder now than I used to be." But change is possible for us as well, because we have to continue to learn and change and shift our perspective. So that's why I want to make sure during the course of this presentation that these learning objectives are met. And I'm sure you can read them, but I do think it's very important to understand that we misunderstand as a society and as facilitators of treatment that what we often see is a person's solution, drug addiction, staying in a violent relationship because they're trying to cope, because it might have been better than what they can think about if they were sober. They don't want to remember those years of sex abuse or the violence at the hands of a mother, a father, an aunt, a grandmother, whoever. And of course, I'm going to introduce you to those of you who didn't study philosophy in college, Maslow's pyramid from the late 30s, early 40s, and how that can be a basis to make inroads in relationships and meet the needs of children and parents. And I'm going to give you some specific opportunities to change the practice in your office, in your courthouse, and with your court. If you didn't think trauma was a problem, don't take my word for it. The Center for Disease Control considers it to be a public health issue. And indeed, when you look at these numbers, which I believe are modest, you can see that of these categories, look at how many of them relate to children. We have 96% of the adolescent psychiatric patients have a history of trauma. We have homeless mothers, 93% with interpersonal trauma. Now, understand that means those children of that homeless mother have lived through trauma as well. 90% juvenile justice involved youth. And you'll see the studying the numbers from Florida in a few moments as to the involvement in juvenile justice. And this is a very low number. This is an old number from a few years ago. 70% of children in foster care have experienced multiple traumas. That's why it's so significant. That's why it's so important. And sadly, 98% of those female offenders may have been the children that we did not approach with a trauma-informed opportunity to heal and to build resilience. Let's talk about what trauma is. And SAMHSA, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, by the way, has fabulous website and links, not as extensive as the CDC, and you'll see that linked in some of the materials and some additional materials as well that I've sent on that you'll be able to access. But it is important to understand that trauma comes from an event, how it's experienced, and the impact, the adverse effects that it has, not just on their physical well-being, but their social, emotional, mental, spiritual. Understand that what makes the difference in being able to overcome a traumatic event, a hurricane, is do you have a buffering relationship, a nurturing relationship? And for many of our children, or our parents, who, by the way, they were children once too, they never had that. And they have complex trauma. This is, by the way, a picture of the Florida court's website. It's open to anybody. And when you go under publications, you see that in the upper bar to the right, and then you pull down the one for Family Court Toolkit, the Trauma and Child Development. You'll notice that on your left, there's different categories you can select. And each of those within there are interactive. And just as on this front page, it shows some interaction. And by the way, you'll see the red flags of trauma that I created that's on there is in our presentation. But you'll see, for instance, under child development, you'll be able to link through and see what is a child, 0 to 12 months, 12 to 24 months, all the way up to age 18, what their developmental stage should be. And that is a great guide for you in being able to see some red flags on what the needs or the unmet needs of the child have been and may continue to be through the courts unless somebody like a guardian ad litem intercedes. And then you'll see that you'll find great detail. You could spend hours on this website. I hope that you will go there to look up each of those sections. And under the resources, that's where we're constantly updating. Sandra Neidert has been with the courts and has done a remarkable job on this site. She updates with the national resources, and you can click on them. They're interactive. This is one of the pieces in the toolkit. And those of us for years who had served on the Family and Children in the Courts worked with Sandy to come up with our Big 10. And notice how many of them would apply directly with the work that a guardian ad litem does. Now, understand that understanding trauma and child development, you need to know that. How are you going to be able to make a recommendation as to unmet needs? We can't just rely on what does this pediatrician say, or what did the past pediatrician say, or the parent or the foster parent. Do we see some telltale signs? Because we're looking at what they say the child's development should be. Do we have delayed speech? That's a real red flag. Now, on the question of presumed trauma, we briefly debated that, and we realized that we shouldn't say maybe there's trauma. We should presume there is trauma. It's more likely that there is trauma than there isn't for each of the individuals who are appearing in our court. And I can tell you that when you look beneath the surface, you will find that. And of course, when we set an expectation for trauma and child development information, let me give you an example of what locally in Dade City our incredible guardian ad litem's office has done. We work together to find resources that we could share with parents. So through some of the information you would download from this toolkit website, or Dr. Mimi Graham of the FSU Early Childhood Development Center has provided us, or information I find from the American Pediatrics Association, all of those guides we have had simplified or made in a readable form that we give to all parents when they come in the door. And of course, the guardian ad litem is kind enough. Retired guardian ad litem Wanda Davis put it together originally, and now it carries on. And each parent gets all of this information, including some of the cutting edge science on trauma and child development. There is a program known as VROOM, VROOM. You should look at it. There's an app, and parents can use the app, or they can sign up to get texts every day of what they need to do to be building the brain of that child. And as we go through and you see a video from Harvard Developing Child, you'll understand why we have to be building the brain, why reading to a child every day is important, and how guardian ad litem can be part of that. We provide other information that might be helpful to the parent, but the key is getting them to understand the impact of the trauma that their children have already been through, and they often can see themselves, and what they need to be looking for in the development of their child. And of course, you'll see later as we go through this why I believe you can be part of ordering certain screenings and assessments. And I believe that if you read the file, any document you have, anything with a trauma lens, you're going to suddenly see things you didn't realize were there. And once life will change once you fully understand it, because you don't know what's beneath the surface until we start looking a little bit deeper. And for those of you who haven't read Dr. Nadine Burke-Harris or her book, or you haven't heard her TED Talk, go look for either one of those. Her TED Talk is remarkable, and I think you've already heard it once on another presentation. But I just love this quote of hers. This is how you start a revolution. You have to shift the frame. That's what we're doing. We're shifting the frame. And once you see the world through a trauma lens, nothing is ever the same. I never have seen my cases or my children or my individuals that come before me, no matter what division, the same now that I understand what it means to look through a trauma lens. I think it's very important that parents that guardian ad litems understand that the parents, while on the surface may seem like the bad guys, that's who we're rescuing these children from, the reality is they were kids once too. And when we look at what lies beneath, and I wish I didn't have the experience of knowing all of these things over and over again that I have seen for the parents of our children, or I have seen with our young children. And sadly, because I've done this for 3 generations, I'm seeing in the 3rd generation, when we didn't know 10 years ago, 20 years ago, what it meant to provide trauma-informed healing. And we did just the traditional. Now, imagine for a child or a parent, you don't have food. I had young children that were rescued from a home with substance abusing parents that were passed out. And the little 4-year-old would pull out the bottom drawer of the dresser so that they could use it as a toilet for her and her younger sibling. They had no sheets on the bed. They had no nurturing. They had no food. And then, of course, some of our parents, I urge you each, when you look at a shelter affidavit and you look at the date of the birth of the parent, and maybe this isn't the first child that came in, but you can look back at the history and you'll see that they'd actually lost 3 other children when they were younger. Well, look at the date of birth of those children, look at the date of birth, figure out how old that mother was when she first became pregnant, and then you'll know whether she was a victim and whether she experienced sex abuse and trauma. And I have found that understanding that there are children that we would have no way of knowing unless we look beneath the surface are the product of rape. I've had parents whose husband or the father of their other children was in prison. And while they were in prison, the mother was raped, had another child. And you might wonder why that relationship with that young child is amiss, and that's because, as one mother told me, I can't stand to look at my child. She looks like my rapist. She sounds like him. She acts like him. And until we could heal that relationship, the child was in and out of Baker Acts. The child was in and out of getting different diagnoses and medications, and the mother couldn't meet the needs of that child. Understand that sex abuse, while it is just one of the adverse childhood experiences, can be the most devastating. I know you already know about the impact adverse childhood experiences has on the likelihood of early death or significant health problems, the 10 leading causes of death. But I have read books, and I have some books later on in this I will show you that you might want to read, but that explain that some horrific circumstances may be the result of just one ACE, and the one ACE is sex abuse. And one of the books that you'll see featured is The Sum of My Parts, and it is Olga Trujillo is a civil rights attorney, and she had a hideous childhood in which She was sexually molested by her father. She was sexually molested then by her brother, who she adored, and then her brother would bring his friends in to molest her. But likewise, I have had female siblings who were being sexually molested and couldn't take it and left and ran away and were eaten up with guilt in knowing that their younger sibling was also being sexually abused and they couldn't rescue them. That's some of the stuff that takes a toll. But understand that unless you dig deeper, you're not going to know that some of the children you're dealing with had siblings that have already been adopted out. And sadly, we have cases that come back in that are children that were TPR'd years ago when they were very young and now are back in the court because they have so many emotional difficulties and never any trauma-informed care that we have adoptive parents that won't pick them up and they just say, I'm done. Those children are also suffering from the separation and the loss of some of their biological siblings. And I have had young children watch a parent shot in the head. I've had children wake up in the morning to try to wake up a parent, and that parent won't wake up. And then they go to the boyfriend of the mother and say, I can't wake up mom. That's okay, go back to sleep. And when that child wakes up, they're both dead. You think that doesn't have an impact? These are things that we aren't necessarily going to read about. Understand this, the impact is stuff that causes emotional distress that may show up in different ways in school, in behaviors, in daycares. These eat up an individual. You think there isn't guilt and shame that's been brought upon these individuals, these children, these parents? Not because it should be, but because either their abuser has led them to believe they wanted it, it's their fault. And that is very confusing when you're a young child and you're wondering, I reported this and now my brother's very angry with me because we don't live at our house anymore with his dog. And then the siblings get after one another. We have to recognize what's going on emotionally inside and the impact of all that trauma and any adverse childhood experiences. And so when we work with children, when we work with the parents, to the extent that you do, it's important that everybody understands we get a clean slate. We have to help children find hope instead of living in the fear and the doubt that there will ever be a different tomorrow for them. Encouragement, you'll find, is one of the best things that we can do to help somebody gain resilience. And we have to help them build self-esteem. And we'll talk about that more when we talk about Maslow's pyramid. I have this on here, and I hope that you will download or save the PDF that was sent to you of this PowerPoint so that you can understand the details of the adverse childhood experience questions. You see, it isn't just that somebody hurt you when you were growing up. Look at this. How often were you insulted, humiliated? Did somebody throw something at you? You think that isn't a virtually everyday experience for some children? It isn't just that you were hit so hard that you were injured, but did you or a parent, a mother, a stepmother, were they threatened with weapons? Did they have things thrown at them? And then there's the sex abuse question. And this is the one that is so devastating because they believe that if they did the touching, that it must be their fault. And of course, their abuser leads them to believe that. So it's important that we understand exactly what the adverse childhood experience study was looking at. And not feeling important, not feeling loved, that's something that a guardian ad litem can help change the perspective that a child has on understanding that somebody actually thinks they're special and they're important. Look at the children when they come into care and the clothing that they have that's ill-fitting, that's dirty. That is an adverse childhood experience. That's something that's impacting how this child thinks of themselves. And understand that many of our children have lost a parent through death, divorce, abandonment, gone to prison. Look at the bottom. It doesn't even have to be a parent that's gone to prison. Is it mom's boyfriend? Is it the uncle? Is it the aunt? Somebody that lived with them that was mentally ill and had a substance abuse problem? Those, as you can see, when we take a good look, whether it's through the predispositional study, whether it's through the attachments to a shelter affidavit, there are telltale signs. If you look at all the prior reports, those are clear indicators to you. It's important that you appreciate what an impact the details of this can have on where a child is at and what their unmet needs are. This is why we're worried. This is why it is a public health problem, because if we don't treat, and the sooner the better, these are the problems we're going to see. And I know that as guardian ad litems, you see this every day. The question is, what do you do about it? Do we just do the traditional? Do we sit back and wait when somebody says, well, fiddlers will be in 4 months? No, we have to intervene now. Expulsion, I'm going to give you some ideas on that later on. And then when we see, as they grow older, we see drugs and alcohol, we often think, oh, we need to get them to a substance abuse program. Well, it's a little bit more than that. And of course, the violence that's typical. You'll see as we go on to see some of the video from Harvard, what's going on in the brain. We'll talk about that. But this is what happens if we don't intervene. And you're part of the solution. You are the eyes and ears of the court, but you're also a source of hope, a source of encouragement, a source of building self-esteem. I'm focusing on and getting everybody on board with meeting these unmet needs now, not in 12 months. And the reason we say the sooner the better, you can see, look at the difference. Before the age of 2, how easy it is, the ability to change. And at the age of 10, it's heading down. But sure, I'm 66. I can still change, but it's a little harder. The sooner, the better. And if our parents are in their 20s and 30s, there's still hope that we can change, but the effort has increased. We need to avoid that, let alone the harm that occurs. Now, let me see if we can succeed. Here we go.
So, Judge, this is Deborah. We can see the video playing, but we cannot hear it. If you'd like, Kelly can try to do it with audio on her computer.
Go ahead. Go ahead and do that. It's a very short video. Do that.
Okay. Kelly, can you jump in, please?
Yes, I am working on that now.
Learning to deal with stress is an important part of healthy development. When experiencing stress, the stress
Wait, do I need to mute mine?
Body and brain go on alert. There's an adrenaline rush, increased heart rate, and an increase in stress hormone levels. When the stress is relieved after a short time, or a young child receives support from caring adults, the stress response winds down and the body quickly returns to normal. In severe situations, such as ongoing abuse and neglect, where there is no caring adult to act as a buffer against the stress response stays activated. Even when there is no apparent physical harm, the extended absence of response from adults can activate the stress response system. Constant activation of the stress response overloads developing systems, with serious lifelong consequences for the child. This is known as toxic stress. Over time, this results in a stress response system set permanently on high alert. In the areas of the brain dedicated to learning and reasoning, the neural connections that comprise brain architecture are weaker and fewer in number. Science shows that the prolonged activation of stress hormones in early childhood can actually reduce neural connections in these important areas of the brain at just the time when they should be growing new ones. Toxic stress can be avoided if we ensure that the environments in which children grow and develop are nurturing, stable, and engaging.
All right, I hope that you will go, let me go back here. Okay.
Judge Tepper, you should be able to accept the presenter again.
Okay, there we go. I hope that you will go back to and spend time at the Harvard Developing Child, sign up for their newsletters. This is Dr. Jacques Schoenkoff is the best. He coined the phrase toxic stress, and they have video after video. They will help you. They will share them with you, and you'll get wonderful information. He's part of the people that created the room for parents to understand the importance of being in touch and meeting the needs of their young children. We're not going to play this, but this one is another website that you can go to, the YouTube, and I've also included some of the materials, I believe, that I sent up there, building core capabilities so that children can deal with the stressors in life, the unexpected. And it's about a 5-minute video, and I urge you privately to take a look at that link. I did want to emphasize for you what the Harvard Developing Child was pointing out. Toxic stress. This is are the children that we deal with are really wired. They're wired to fight, flee, or freeze. And we often misunderstand. That's why we end up with ADHD diagnosis, because they think they can't focus. But the reality is they're probably just on hypervigilant because they don't know when somebody's coming to hit them or a parent. And the freeze mode, that's because they literally, that's how they respond. And it looks like they don't care, they're not paying attention, but they can't absorb anything because of the damage that was done, as was just shown in that video, to the frontal lobe. You know, I've had teenagers that have been through so much, and we think we've got them safely returned to a parent, and then they'll run away and hit the mom. And I remember a conversation I had with a young boy who'd been through a lot. And he apologized for hitting his mom and running, and I was explaining to him this, and he goes, "Oh my God, that's what I did. I hit her and then I ran. I'm so sorry." But understanding it is important, and sometimes children will talk to you about that, and it's okay to talk about the reality of the impact of trauma and ACEs. Obviously, there'll be some therapists, but it's okay. Dr. Vince Folletti of the ACEs study, who I've had the pleasure of meeting and speaking and had him teach with me to the Circuit Judges Conference this summer, has told me it's okay to say these things because it's uplifting to an individual to find out, oh, I'm okay. This isn't a secret anymore. I'm not alone. And to understand that you still want to talk to them. You don't think less of them because you now know some of the bad things that happened to them. But it's important that we understand this. And it's important, we're going to have to be part of the solution in getting our schools to be trauma sensitive. I know many of you deal with teenagers that are getting in trouble in school, getting suspended, even getting expulsion notices, ending up with delinquency. We have to be part of the education process of that, and we'll talk about that in a few moments, because it isn't just going to go away. It's only going to escalate unless we get the right services in place. Take a look at this. Florida a couple of years ago on a day, just one day, looked at how many youth in the juvenile delinquency system had 4 or more ACEs, 50% of them. And look at the crossover. That's us. That's our juvenile dependency and juvenile delinquency, 72%. Compared to the original study, is it any wonder we have the issues and the difficulties that we do because we haven't been doing a trauma-informed approach? So let's understand. Look at what I know. You've seen this in your youth. You see them. They don't know who to trust. They try to find every which way to break up the new placement. That hypervigilance, they don't know where danger is coming from. They don't transition. That's why we have an early childhood court with an infant mental health specialist for those children 3 and under who can't fully communicate with you, help with transitions, to say a good goodbye, and to keep connections that are positive. You wonder why a child's anxious? It isn't because they're not interested. This is the result of what happens to them. And they are very hesitant to get involved in counseling. And that's where we start getting into the fighting. This is where we end up with children getting Baker acted. And they don't know how to calm down. That's why we need trauma-informed services. and the grievances. You've seen that. We have to help them heal and take control of their memories, take control of their feelings. And that's why it's so frustrating when they don't understand consequences. That's part of the damage of the frontal lobe. That goes hand in hand in it. But understand, and this is where guardian ad litems and nurturing relationships, be it with a family, a non-relative, and even a positive foster parent or prospective adoptive parent, can make the difference. Every traumatic event does not have to end up with a trauma reaction. It all depends upon these factors. It actually matters in the type of trauma response you're going to get, whether or not they have, of course, one of the keys that you can be involved in is the support system, coping styles. Often you hear that somebody who has a good sense of humor can roll with it more. Well, that's part of that is temperament. Part of it is a coping style. And having trauma-informed therapists working with our children in child welfare can help them develop that if they don't already have it. And building resiliency factors is very important. Now, these are obviously parental resilience. That's a key if they're not in the system. And sometimes we have non-offending parents who have that but might have been kept away from a child. Another reason we may want to try to get that child placed with that non-offending parent. Social connections, we're going to talk about that when we get to Maslow's pyramid and how you can be involved in that. The knowledge of parenting and child development, we have to make sure it's evidence-based. Circle of Security, if you haven't heard of that, find out in your area why it isn't available. Dr. Neil Boris is the international spokesperson for the Circle of Security. We changed the evidence-based parenting program that was offered in our area with our local community behavioral health program. And it's a much higher up on the California evidence-based guide of what's a good program and what isn't. And our parents have been transformed. So many of them said, I wish I knew this with my other children. And so it's important to understand parenting styles that can make the difference in overcoming the abuse and the neglect. And of course, time is important and support. And you can be part of building social and emotional competence along with the trauma-informed therapist. Please note I have a link on here so you can get more information on that. And then there's always the diagnosis. I'm sure if I asked you to raise your hands, how many of you have had children with multiple diagnoses? Most of the hands would go up. What is it? Is it PTSD? Is it depression? Is it conduct disorder? Boy, I've seen all of these diagnoses. These are just in children, let alone in a parent. I've had parents in 25 years of services have different ones. Well, that depends. Did they come in when they were under the acute stress of a horrific event? Did they come in while they were still substance abusing and high or coming off of drugs? That matters. And that's a problem. And that's why we have to be sure, and you're part of this solution, that we don't have children that are misdiagnosed, that we make sure that a trauma assessment has been conducted. I have had a child that came into care at age 16 who had between age 11 and 16 had been Baker acted 23 times, 3 times in 10 days. Out the door, back in the same day. I had a neuropsychologist look at all of those records. Not a single time in those 23 times did anybody ever ask any of the key ACEs questions, let alone the impact of trauma. Not once did they discover that he had been abused and neglected as a toddler, removed from those parents, placed in a foster home, who adopted him by age 5, and that in that household, those parents began fighting. Those parents, the father was having an affair, and the child walked in on the father having an affair. And the father then made the child the focus of physical abuse, and that it was their secret. The adoptive parents divorced. We already have multiple ACEs here. And after they divorced, the child would go over every other weekend, and the adoptive dad's girlfriend would have full sexual relations with this 11-year-old child when the Baker Acts began. And nobody had ever asked the right questions. That's why we have to be sure what is a correct diagnosis. And as guardian ad litem, you can be a very powerful voice to be sure that everybody is up to speed on the past history. That's why, you know what, it's not just words at shelter when a judge orders, I need all of the past medical and school records. Take a look at them. Take a good look at them. And you have a right to be heard at the time of disposition. You have a right to be heard. And hopefully you have judges that will actually allow volunteers to speak, but certainly the attorney for the guardian ad litem can be heard. Excuse me, Judge, but in that disposition, I didn't hear a trauma assessment. And by the way, Judge, I want a referral for these children right away, not just a comprehensive behavioral health assessment. That is not a trauma assessment. I need a trauma assessment of this child that's age appropriate. And we have to make sure they're qualified. You know that you often are asked before psychotropic drugs are used to go on a Medline or to get a second opinion. Well, bravo for a guardian ad litem attorney who will say, Judge, you know, I looked at this, the credentials of this person, and they're not even a pediatric psychiatrist. What business do they have making these diagnoses? We want a second opinion. That's how you can be heard. That's how you can make a difference. And you'll need to understand, and we'll talk further about some of the resources in all of our communities that you might want to say, but Judge, have you considered a referral here? Have you considered a referral here? And don't just let them medicate and say, oh, well, this is good. No, this one's not working. Let's add a second one in or a third one. There has to be a balance between a correct diagnosis, a trauma assessment, and therapy, not just meds. And if you have the issue that most of us have, where the placements are changing from county to county, individual to group, for all sorts of reasons, how can you possibly have consistency with a therapist? You have to be that voice for that child. Judge, I object. We object. We are asking for you to do such and such, or limit where they can place this child, so that, or you need to have the family specialists that are transporting bring this child to this therapist every day to maintain this connection. And we have to be consistent. You're out there, you're seeing the children. Give them hope that tomorrow is going to be better, that the past is not their future, and that there is another life. And of course, I know you are patient, I know you're kind, and I know you listen, but never make a promise you can't keep. I never promised something to a child. I gave them, so I told them I would try. I couldn't promise it. And when I've had children rescued from being trafficked, and they get on the phone and they go, Judge, you were right, you were right. So I didn't want to be right. And they go, but you never lied to me. Don't lie or they won't trust you. They need to be able to trust adults. And understand that when we talk about a trauma-informed approach, you're learning, and I know you're getting more and more education, and you've had some on understanding the signs and the symptoms. I'm not asking you to be a therapist. I'm asking you to be alert, so that if you think something isn't being addressed, or there's something going on that's not appropriate in the home in which you're located, be heard. Ask for a hearing. And it's very important. This is, by the way, the SAMHSA, another one of the sites, the links to the SAMHSA. This is a kind of his breakdown. Dr. Hertz, who ironically is with Kaiser Permanente, which is where Dr. Folletti was when he began the ACE study. This is what a trauma-informed approach is. Yes, understand ACEs. Focus on what happened to you. Get the survivors, get your youth engaged in decision-making. And of course, if we don't get the services referred immediately, we're wasting time, and we have 12 months to undo what may have been multiple years of abuse and neglect. So what can you do to change things? When you're in court, get your lawyer to make a request, as I mentioned, about a trauma assessment. Now, timely hearings. Let's say you order, we have a fabulous neuropsychologist in the 6th Judicial Circuit who will give you a scat of detailed recommendations that deal with, by the way, we have a child that has a special ed issue and needs this and needs that. You need to share this with everybody in the school system. You need to share this with the pediatrician. You need to share this with the caregivers. These are the issues. These are the problems. But if you've ordered this assessment and you don't all set in advance a return hearing date, a status review, to be sure, number one, the assessment took place and that the recommendations are being implemented, you could lose months. And so I urge the guardian ad litems to be on top of that. And of course, sometimes what a duty judge ordered at the time of the original shelter for visitation may not be appropriate now. So you need to be on top always based upon your guardian ad litem's observing visitation to see if you see any telltale signs. And whether or not you want to say, Judge, we want to make a motion to change this to therapeutic visits. We want to hold visits until the therapist thinks it's in their best interest. Or we're recommending we stop sibling visitation, or that the siblings be separated, because it's not unusual to have a perpetrator of violence or sex abuse being an older sibling. Or, as I mentioned earlier, one of the siblings blames the other for breaking up the family because they told about the victimization that was occurring while they were together. And then in schools, this is so critical. I wish our schools were trauma sensitive. They're not. Some are, some aren't. They try, but you can be the voice. You need to know when there are going to be sessions, or ask the court to say, Judge, would you please order that a case management or the foster parents, whoever, set up a session with the guidance counselor, social workers. We want to be notified. We want to be there. We want to talk about what the needs of this child are, because you may know better than they do. In daycare centers, we have been blessed. We have a very strong group of stakeholders in East Pasco. I used to hold meetings about 9 times a year, and we would come together and we would learn about what was available that was trauma informed, or what would help with parents and substance abuse programs, what was available in parenting, learn about circle of security, learn about infant mental health. And one of the things that one of our big players has been an Early Learning Coalition, and they have embraced trying to be trauma informed, so much so that they're now on their second series of doing a train the trainer. They are sending people to a circle of security training to become trainers, so that all of their daycare providers that are getting licensed by them have been trained in circle of security, so that we don't have a 2-year-old being thrown out of daycare because they've been biting or hitting. They have somebody that knows how to respond, to read the need of the child and meet that need. And if you find that the problem is in the daycare, that's your job. You go to court and make a motion to change that daycare. And if you don't have a Sunshine Star ratings in your area, Hillsborough has phenomenal ratings. We're getting it in Pasco County. Ask why not of the Early Childhood Coalition. Get involved. We have one of our state attorneys is on the Early Learning Coalition board now. Maybe one of you needs to ask to be on that board. And when you're in the caregiver's home, take a look. Maybe they don't even realize there's potential triggers. Maybe they didn't realize that the uncle shows up periodically that was a problem, or somebody by the same name, and you're observing what's going on. Or make sure I don't have a foster parent that needs to be reported for being abusive, emotionally or physical. And of course, here's our crossover situation. Delinquency, staffings, and hearings. Obviously, I think everybody, and we are supposed to have unified family courts. And when I say unified, I mean, if I'm doing a disposition on a child in dependency, I need to have all of the dependency players, guardian ad litem, case managers, and delinquency juvenile probation officers there. You, as a guardian ad litem, would say, Judge, we're asking to receive notice. We want to know when that dispositional hearing is. We want to be invited to the delinquency staffings because you can be heard. I had one of the young men you saw in that opening picture towards the far left. He's the oldest of the brothers. He does not wish to be adopted at this time. He's very attached to his 20-year-old sister and the little nephew. And he had hit his mother, his aunt were all meth dealers. Well, of course, they learned it from grandma. Grandma is a big meth dealer. They're all in drug court now, by the way. And one of that young man's biggest worry was that one of his brothers, who wasn't in an adoptive home, the one, the redhead next to him, that he was going to take over grandma's business. Now he's busy worried about this while he was in a commitment placement, which regrettably, initially, he was sent from here, from the central part of Florida, the Hillsborough, Pasco, Pinellas area, to Miami-Dade. That cut off all of his sibling visitation. Parental rights had been terminated previously. And I ordered him brought back for our hearings. And during that time, we brought all of his siblings in so he could visit. And we found out some things that were going on. Guardian ad litem made a motion. We need to remove him from that, Judge. We think they should be reported, and we're asking you to move him to the Tampa Bay area so he can, his success depends upon his relationship with his siblings, and he's not getting all of the very specific trauma-informed proposals that have been sent down with him. And so, yes, DJJ objected. I overruled it. They brought him back. His siblings began to visit with him at the program. The caregiver of his nephew began to participate and became his caregiver. He transitioned out. That is because our guardian ad litem was on board. Our guardian ad litem got it. You can be involved like that. The impact is huge. And if you haven't heard of the Children of Inmates, I urge you to look it up. We had a presentation a couple of years ago on that. They are involved in 15 different prisons. And sometimes our caregivers, our relative caregivers, our grandma or grandpa of a parent who's in prison who isn't in a position to take care of the child, but was not the reason the child came into care. And even if grandma or grandpa or the aunt or uncle adopts, they may still have a relationship with that parent. The Children of Inmates does a trauma-informed approach of preparing children and bringing children to a facility to meet with parents. It's a very positive thing you should look into. If we don't do these things, then we're going to have what I have sadly witnessed over the years when I have reconnected with an individual who was a teenager when I first had her and her siblings in adult court, in delinquency court, in the parents in divorce court, the parent in felony court. When I had that young child, now a parent, reach out to me and say, Judge, by the way, my son keeps getting in trouble in school. Can you help me? And we formed a very positive relationship. And I spoke to her saying, you know what, you never had any trauma counseling. Most of her abuse had occurred down in Miami. And she said, I just couldn't tell my story one more time. I had another therapist all the time. So I just stuffed it down and pretended it never happened. That's what some of our youth are doing. That's what some of our parents have done. And for some, they weren't listened to. Nobody believed them. And of course, we have the overwhelming amount of shame that's placed upon them. The trauma-informed care can help them overcome. And we don't want our children thinking that suicide is the only answer. And it doesn't help our children to have parents that commit suicide. These are the red flags. You can find them online. I've talked about some of them. These are things that you can see that might lead you to believe that child or that parent has trauma, again, presumed trauma. And of course, show me a runaway and I'll show you a child who's been exposed to trauma. And just because you're you're committing violence doesn't mean you're not a victim of violence. And of course, we need to be aware, and we're going to look at a video quickly here, that meth used to be prescribed as an antidepressant. Marijuana and tobacco are anti-anxieties. If that's what's the problem is persistent, then the chances are we have trauma. Now, it's one thing to move children out of harm's way, but if we don't do something to eliminate the damage, is what we're talking about, we haven't changed anything. We have to give everybody hope and a clean start. I love this of Dr. Seuss, the Dr. Seuss, you tell your youth, tell your children, you have brains in your head, you have feet in your shoes, you can steer yourself any direction you cheer. In other words, the future is limitless to you. You're not bound by your past. Please instill this in children. These are the stats. I don't need to go over them with you on the significance of substance abuse. And we have to overcome the shame and secrecy that has been imposed upon them. Because I do want to point out that using drugs is a great way to silence the voices in your head, to silence the memories that are triggered. And that's the solution that Dr. Folletti talks about. Is the solution. We treat the substance abuse, but we don't treat the underlying experience. And substance abuse has been established to be experience-based. And I just want to show you, I know we got a little bit of a late start, so we're going to go over a little bit here. This to play.
Judge Tepper, we can't hear it. I'm going to switch it over to mine again.
Okay.
If you'll just bear with me for one moment.
All right.
What causes, say, heroin addiction? This is a really stupid question, right? It's obvious. We all know it. Heroin causes heroin addiction. Here's how it works. If you use heroin for 20 days, by day 21, your body would physically crave the drug ferociously because there are chemical hooks in the drug. That's what addiction means. But there's a catch. Almost everything we think we know about addiction is wrong. If you, for example, break your hip, you'll be taken to a hospital and you'll be given loads of diamorphine for weeks or even months. Diamorphine is heroin. It's in fact much stronger heroin than any addict can get on the street because it's not contaminated by all the stuff drug dealers dilute it with. There are people near you being given loads of deluxe heroin in hospitals right now. So at least some of them should become addicts. But this has been closely studied. It doesn't happen. Your grandmother wasn't turned into a junkie by her hip replacement. Why is that? Our current theory of addiction comes in part from a series of experiments that were carried out earlier in the 20th century. The experiment is simple. You take a rat and put it in a cage with 2 water bottles. One is just water, the other is water laced with heroin or cocaine. Almost every time you run this experiment, the rat will become obsessed with the drugged water and keep coming back for more and more until it kills itself. But in the 1970s, Bruce Alexander, a professor of psychology, noticed something odd about this experiment. The rat is put in the cage all alone. It has nothing to do but take the drugs. What would happen, he wondered, if we tried this differently? So he built Rat Park, which is basically heaven for rats. It's a lush cage where the rats would have coloured balls, tunnels to scamper down, plenty of friends to play with, and they could have loads of sex. Everything a rat about town could want. And they would have the drugged water and the normal water bottles. But here's the fascinating thing. In Rat Park, rats hardly ever use the drugged water. None of them ever use it compulsively. None of them ever overdose. But maybe this is a quirk of rats, right? Well, helpfully, there was a human experiment along the same lines. The Vietnam War. 20% of American troops in Vietnam were using a lot of heroin. People back home were really panicked because they thought there would be hundreds of thousands of junkies on the streets of the United States when the war was over. But a study followed the soldiers home and found something striking. They didn't go to rehab. They didn't even go into withdrawal. 95% of them just stopped after they got home. If you believe the old theory of addiction, that makes no sense. But if you believe Professor Alexander's theory, it makes perfect sense. Because if you're put into a horrific jungle in a foreign country where you don't want to be, and you could be forced to kill or die at any moment, doing heroin is a great way to spend your time. But if you go back to your nice home with your friends and your family, it's the equivalent of being taken out of that first cage and put into a human rat park. It's not the chemicals, it's your cage. We need to think about addiction differently. Human beings have an innate need to bond and connect. When we are happy and healthy, we will bond with the people around us. But when we can't, because we're traumatized, isolated, or beaten down by life, we will bond with something that gives us some sense of relief. It might be endlessly checking a smartphone, it might be pornography, video games, Reddit, gambling, or it might be cocaine. But we will bond with something because that is our human nature. The path out of unhealthy bonds is to form healthy bonds. to be connected to people you want to be present with. Addiction is just one symptom of the crisis of disconnection that's happening all around us. We all feel it. Since the 1950s, the average number of close friends an American has been steadily declining. At the same time, the amount of floor space in their homes has been steadily increasing. To choose floor space over friends, to choose stuff over connection. The war on drugs we've been fighting for almost a century now has made everything worse. Instead of helping people heal and getting their life together, we have cast them out from society. We have made it harder for them to get jobs and become stable. We take benefits and support away from them if we catch them with drugs. We throw them in prison cells, which are literally cages. We put people who are not well in a situation that makes them feel worse and hate them for not recovering. For too long, we've talked only about individual recovery from addiction. But we need now to talk about social recovery, because something has gone wrong with us as a group. We have to build a society that looks a lot more like Rat Park and a lot less like those isolated cages. We are going to have to change the unnatural way we live and rediscover each other. The opposite of addiction is not sobriety. The opposite of addiction is connection. This video is a collaboration with Johan Hari, the author of the book Chasing the Scream, The First and Last Days of the War on Drugs. He was very kind to work with us on this video to spread the word. We recommend that you give the book a try. Our videos are made thanks to your support on patreon.com. If you want to help us make more of them, we really appreciate your support. We made an interactive version of this video together with some friends. See the link in the description.
Okay, Judge Tepper, I am working on giving you back control. Give me just 1 second here.
All right. I hope that you all loved that video. I think it's an amazing revelation that as a society we need to understand. But do you see how, as guardian ad litems, that you're part of
Judge
what makes
Tepper, are you there?
I am. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Hello?
We can hear you, Judge. Go ahead.
Okay.
We can hear you. Go ahead.
I hope that you will share the link to Rat Park. It is a phenomenal education and for our society, but it's a phenomenal education for guardian ad litem to understand why they make such a difference with children. You're part of that Rat Park. You're part of that connectiveness. Connections are critical. And there are a wide variety of connections that can help you develop them. I want to talk about that a little bit more. So do you understand why it's so important for guardian ad litems to highlight, to make sure the court, if the judge is failing or the attorney for child welfare isn't recommending that a child get trauma therapy or a parent, then we're losing an opportunity to heal. Because if our goal is reunification, we need a healthy parent, not one who's going to get sober for a while, and then because we haven't dealt with the ghosts that are rattling around in their head, and they are not connected, they haven't healed from and revealed and overcome the shame and the secrecy, the guilt, whatever it may be, they're just going to use again when there's difficulties. And that's how we have children that get disappointed when they think the parent's about to reunify, or they've already been reunified and they're re-traumatized by coming back into the system. So that's why it's important for our children to have an advocate like a guardian ad litem who understands trauma, the true experience-based substance abuse reality, not the substance abuse that's substance based. So if we have teenagers that are using drugs, chances are that's a telltale sign that we don't have trauma therapy in place for them. Now, Maslow has been known as the best form of motivation. Some say the best form of encouragement. And it was an eye-opener for me about 5 years ago when I stumbled upon it and understood, of course, this is what we need to offer. It's known as a hierarchy of needs. And so, how can we expect whether it be a parent or a child to do well, whether it's in school or doing case plan tasks, if they don't have a safe place to sleep? They don't have, and therefore they're not getting sleep. They don't have adequate food. their health is challenged. That's why, as a community, East Pasco has risen up, and we are constantly, and I was always sharing information on, this is where you can go to get your clothes washed. This is where you can go to get a hot meal. It's just where you can go for some fellowship. You can't get, you don't have a safe place to live here. This is a referral for the Domestic Violence Center. Here's some housing referrals. Here's a residential drug treatment program. It doesn't have to come from a provider. It can come from us. And children need these things as well. You know, we have to help them get to safety. And we have obligations, you'll see, I think, even in a courthouse on this. And then you can't get to the next level, how can you get to safety, which, by the way, also includes security in your employment, if you don't have a place to sleep and wash so you can get to work, if you don't have transportation to get to work? Family, having the family near you is also considered a form of the safety. And then, of course, once we can do that, then we can start working on belonging. That's friendships, you know, the normalcy that we talk about in the Guardian Ad Litem program. That's critical. Obviously, we want it to be normalcy that's safe, but being able to have contact with family, affection, being part of a group, playing volleyball, being part of a football league, that matters. And then we can start working on esteem. And that is our self-esteem and getting it from others. You think it matters not when they hear from you or from their teacher or their coach or their caregiver or the court, wow, I am impressed. And that goes for the parent as well. I hope that you're part of the celebration when a parent says, by the way, Judge, I've been sober 60 days now. You know, that's a round of applause. And for that child that's passing everything or hasn't missed any class, that's a reason to celebrate for that child. That's gaining respect from others so they'll respect themselves. And the self-actualization, that is, the irony is, and I just wanted to show you here what each of these represent. Self-actualization is really becoming the best that you can possibly be. Maslow based it on people like George Washington Carver, Eleanor Roosevelt. He felt they had become all that they could possibly be. That's where we can be creative. That's where we do problem solving. That's what we strive for. We have to meet these needs. And by the way, this is in a courtroom. This is what we did in our area. We have our programs that offer the meals. I offer healthy snacks in the courtroom. I also offer condoms, by the way. But, you know, we have to start with, you can't grow something if you don't have good, rich soil. This is the basics of it. All those books, which, by the way, have now grown to twice that size, has information on how to meet the physiological needs of our families. Safety. You know, think about it. We have children that are coming to court, and children have a right to come to court. Can you imagine if they're coming and mom's boyfriend is the one who was beating or sexually molesting them and is there? Then that's why we have to be involved. Even a guardian ad litem has to say, excuse me, Judge, but we're not doing a time certain calendar, and I'm concerned about waiting out in the lobby. I don't know if mom's still with so-and-so. And be a proponent of time certain dockets so you don't get a mess out there. You don't want them re-traumatized. You don't want them to be wetting themselves because they just heard or saw a perpetrator of abuse to them, be it a child or a parent. In domestic violence, these are things that we had created to make it safer for people coming to domestic violence court with certain rules, and of course having multiple languages available. But we also realized that we had to make sure that a child wasn't, or a foster parent, or the parent who was a victim wasn't going to be followed out in the parking lot. And all of our bailiffs are educated in that, and everybody is held. They don't have to sit together in a dependency court where they've been victimized. We find out who's going to leave first. We find out, they radio back, they left the parking lot. Judge, it's safe to go now. That's safety in the courthouse. These are all the different things. Siblings that are broken up need to be seeing each other. Therapy dogs in your courthouse and in your courtroom are important. Helping children get involved in art, journaling, sports, just being able to be together. matters. And self-esteem. What an accomplishment to be able to celebrate a youth who had been in a high-level commitment program and goes on to graduate, goes on to get a full-time job, goes on to be striving to enter the military, goes on to graduate. This is huge for making sure that their children don't come back into the system. And of course, this is an example of a mother that wrote to me. This was many years ago. I still stay in touch with her. She had lost her first child to TPR, and fast forward, 12 years, and she had a teenager that was then removed, but then she became sober. She was a spokesperson, and she has made a difference for the life of that child, who, by the way, is now 18 and doing well. But if you plant it in rich soil, then the chances are you will have a beautiful bloom, and you're part of that. These are just examples of parents that actually went on to found out that they could be a great parent, that they could pay for their own expenses, that they could have a positive relationship with their parent, that their child would be doing well. I love to hear that a child that was failing out of everything, that was Baker Act, to hear, blasts from the past, that they're on honor roll, they're going to go to the state college. That's self-actualization. And hope has been found to be giving them the hope. That's a path to resilience. That's the best predictor. You instill hope, and it's so important. And they say it's the best predictor. And I don't have a copy of one of Casey Gwynn's books here, but Casey Gwynn started the Camp Hope, and he's now in 15 states. He wrote Rising Hope with this psychologist. They did some studies. I urge you to find that book. He's written 3 different books. He had ACEs in his childhood. I first heard him speak in the 90s. He went on to be the elected city attorney in San Diego, but he has formed this wonderful Alliance of Hope International, which also does education programs around the country. This is a hard thing sometimes for people to grasp, including guardian ad litems. I love this picture because this is how biofamilies can matter. Like I talk about the children that have come back into care, they've been adopted, and now they're being unadopted. And they're still striving to connect with those other siblings that they haven't seen in years, or the bio siblings that are still in that adoptive placement. This picture represents the best of trauma therapy and a kind and generous and connecting adoptive family. This picture, that little girl in arms, is the child that was adopted earlier in December. And in the far right, you see that handsome young man. That's that little girl's father. These are the adoptive parents of that little girl and the biological siblings of the adoptive parents. Along the way, Thomas had been in the system as a dependent child when he was about 13 or 14, and as a delinquent child, and then as an abusive, neglectful parent. He is 20 years old now, and when he was a child, his older siblings had been in and out of the system before I ever came along, but I had him when his parents said, we don't really want to give up drugs. He's in a nice foster home. Yeah, well, go ahead, we'll sign our rights away right in front of him. Well, that started his spiral downward, and he ran all over the state. He picked up charges all over the state of Florida. I am quite certain he was sexually trafficked, judging from our interactions, and we got him some trauma therapy in the juvenile detention center, because we have a trauma-informed detention center. But he would do well, and then he would get out and he would run. And then he was picked up on an old warrant from juvenile post-commitment supervision. He thought we didn't have jurisdiction after 18. Surprise, it's me. And we still had him. And sadly, he had a 45-year-old girlfriend who I'm convinced was trafficking him, who then became pregnant with his child and was providing him with meth. And what a surprise, he was depressed. And so he and she came into dependency court as parents. Regretfully, she was not fully prosecuted to the extent of the law she should have been for sex with a minor, but they both gave up their rights. This couple very quickly became the foster parents, and they agreed to supervise Thomas in his visits with his little girl. And they became the parents he never had. And sometimes it was sporadic. And in the end, in December, when we did the adoption, I didn't see him there. And the last time I'd heard, I hadn't seen him in a couple of months. And I asked, how's he doing? What's up? Anybody heard? They said, surprise. They brought him in. He had a driver's license. He was enrolled as a student in state college. And they were continuing to allow him contact with his daughter. All he said he ever wanted was to be a better parent to his daughter than his parents had been to him. They took him with them to New York City for Christmas. He said Christmas had always just been another day to him. He had no idea that this is what families do. I've raised the issue with his family that they could adopt him. His parental rights were terminated, and they're thinking of it. This is what the importance of connection is. I realize as guardian ad litem, you don't have control over your courthouse, but maybe you can be a voice, a suggestion, if your courthouse isn't trauma-informed like ours is. This is a children's waiting area that a retired judge did the mural. The Women's Club donates, our clerk donates things to it. And we have peaceful spaces with greenery in our courthouse. These are not just my courthouse, these are around the country. Courts that have chosen to be trauma-informed. The 2 for 2 books, those are, a judge in Iowa started those. We hand out that information in our packets. Our guardian ad litem gets all these matching books, and we get it's every day a child should be read to according to the American Pediatrics. Every day we get a parent on the phone and a foster parent who agrees to have the baby in their lap while they turn the pages of the book that the parent's reading over the phone, or has read at visits and reads over the phone. And it's building the brain, it's building the attachment. How do you build attachment for a baby that's not seeing a parent on a regular basis? That's a trauma-informed. The therapy dogs. I have to fight with the kids not to take these bears home. I have to get big bears for teenage boys to have because they want them. This is a trauma-informed waiting area. This is what it looks like. Our clerk does all of this artwork that is displayed, and they celebrate children's artwork every year. It's a big deal. But what an environment as opposed to sterile white walls, a courtroom that greets you with stuffed animals and beanie babies, where children will, if they come there and they see the therapy dog and the next time they don't, they go, where's our therapy dog? It matters. It matters what a waiting room looks like if you're at the Children's Advocacy Center. It matters if you have waiting areas in a case management facility that isn't child-friendly. As I said, we need to make sure they are having less stress. We need to be sure we're all actively listening and that we're not part of the problem. We have to get to the point of understanding that children can understand that we can offer them an opportunity to heal, that it's not their fault, that we can give them an opportunity to talk to somebody. This is a dialogue I often have with children in delinquency. This is a dialogue I think you can safely have. These are things that we know help. We have to sometimes, Dr. Folletti says, just listen. When doctors used to say to him, oh, what if they say something? What do I do? Dr. Folletti said, just listen. Don't be judgmental. Hear them, remember them, it matters. I've mentioned this before about time-certain dockets. Again, I urge you to get quality screenings. I urge you to do whatever it takes to be sure that we have evidence-based individuals doing our screenings, get everybody on board. By the way, this is our one of our rotaries does quilts that they have us give away to families, foster parents, adoptive parents, even parents that are reunifying. Our courthouse is filled with information for them, bookshelves. You have children's advocacy centers in your area. They are one of the best evidence-based providers of services for trauma. Most of them are trained to deal with even victims of human trafficking, which sadly some of our children are, sex abuse. They do non-offending parents training for parents who didn't act appropriately when a child was being sexually molested. They do some therapeutic visits. They are remarkable. And you can go to this national website and you can find out where there's one near you. And then if they're not part of the solution, you need to get them on board. And if you're a community-based care provider or the judge isn't recommending it, you recommend they do the assessment and use them. There's so many services out there that you can educate yourself on and ask why not? Why isn't this being done? These are partners, and whether your court wants to partner with them and create stakeholder groups, you need to partner with them. Our local college has been a great source of public education in trauma. Our service clubs are a great help in meeting the needs of some of our adopted families. Boys and Girls Club, that could be the nurturing, belonging atmosphere across from one of our poorest schools in the area. Veterans groups want to help. There's a vast number of community partners. I've mentioned to you some of these about our early learning centers, a Rotary. Our midwife center was begun by a child that I had as a teenager. I allowed to marry 28 years ago to emancipate her. She's still married. She went to college. She became a midwife. She now has a support group for pregnant women who were victims of sex abuse because pregnancy and exams are a trigger. Reach out to these individuals in your community. You must have them. You need to be their partners. You need to recommend them. One of the things that matters is getting children engaged in the community. I've had our guardian ad litem attorney reach out to his spouse who works in a field, a university where there is a sporting event, and can get tickets and gets tickets for that child who was adopted and unadopted and is now waiting for a forever family, but loves basketball. Like, wow, you can get me there? Wow, they found a way to get me sneakers so I can better play. That's significant. Getting them involved if they need to learn art, finding the connections for that, finding that if there's a community garden, get them involved in that. There's so many options for you. And if you don't have behavioral health programs that have cut down all of their silos and are providing services in-home, then you need to find out why not. This is for in-service. I'm not going to go over this with you. There's nothing to stop you from doing in-services on trauma-informed services if your courts aren't doing it. Please remember that it's known as the pair of ACEs, and that's the adverse community environments for our children, where there's no mobility, there's poor housing, there's violence. And for these children, there's no post-traumatic stress disorder because there's never a post. There's always violence in the neighborhood. We have to guard against that. We have to help be sure our children aren't returning to that we've helped find ways to elevate the bio family. These are books I urge you to read. One of the most powerful, I've heard Elizabeth Smart speak. She is an amazing story of resilience. When she was a captive for so long, she always remembered her mother's voice, her mother singing. If you don't think that having nurturing relationships helps save you, read Elizabeth Smart's story. Poor J.C. Dungard, read her story and the story of resilience and recovery. The sum of my parts I mentioned to you, this is important to understand from a child's perspective, as well as sometimes for that parent we have with a dissociative disorder. That's because of the complex trauma that occurred to them. But Olga, when she was very young, a next door neighbor used to babysit her, and she could vividly recall she would applaud when she would come down the steps successfully. Oh, great job, you're doing wonderful. Reach your hand out to hold the hand. Now, eventually the abusive father stopped that next door neighbor from babysitting her. She suffered, as I indicated, horrible abuse, but she said when all those good things were being said to her during the time she was babysat, she would reach her hand out and grab those words and hold them in her hand. At night, when life was unbearable, she would open up her hand and she could hear those words come back to her. Smart, good girl, you can do it. That is what we need more of. And if you're not familiar with the early childhood courts, please go on to that website. And there's wonderful resources there to help you with early childhood. There's short videos, long videos. Take them. We can change the trajectory of our children. We, as guardian ad litems, as individuals in the child welfare system, even in the delinquency system, we have the ability to change the next generation. You can do it. I know that each of these individuals that I've listed on here are part of the solution. You are a critical part. And the sooner the better that we can intervene, the more likely we are to end the cycle. As I said, I just retired after 30 years. 3 generations was enough. Thank God we've understood ACEs and trauma-informed services so that we can get those trauma-informed services to children even as young as 6 months old with infant mental health specialists, that we have properly trained trauma-informed therapists that will go to a child's school, like the HEADS program, which is one of the resources you'll see in some of the materials. They're in 15 counties, and hopefully you'll get some further education on some of those specific therapies. But we can do it one at a time. We can change that caterpillar to a butterfly and change the world one child at a time. Thank you, everybody. This is indeed the way to change our society, our community, our neighborhoods, our families, our children. Thank you. And that's my nurturing relationship, my big brother.
Thank you so much, Judge Tepper. This was wonderful. I have been taking notes throughout the entire time, and I see we're getting some of our comments in the box that share my assessment of how fabulous this was. If you don't mind, I'd like to read you a few of the questions that have come up, and if anyone wants to go ahead and pop a question in the box, I'll go ahead and start reading through them. And of course, some of these, of course, will go back to material that was potentially early in the presentation, but the first one that I see up here is from a person named Justin Waters, and he's asking about how the genetics of a person can influence their predisposition to different psychological disorders, and whether or not a polygenic score is something that you're familiar with to inform care or the way the problems presented to you are being treated.
Well, I have not done polygenetics, but they do believe in historical trauma, and it's very complicated. Science is not my thing, but there are articles, and I can send a very long article that talked about epigenetics and how literally the DNA is changed because of the historical trauma. The Native Americans are an example of that. They have established that, and I will make a point to find that. It's an article that appeared in the New Yorker magazine about 3 years ago. It's the best article I've read on epigenetics, and it does have an impact, and we should be aware of that, but that doesn't mean that we still can't provide services that can change the outcomes.
Okay, thank you. And Judge Tepper has provided some different handouts and materials that she thought would be useful to guardians ad litem in particular, and those will be posted on the website. Judge, do you want to just maybe give everybody your little list of some of your favorite resources? I know I could guess at them based on the materials that you've sent to me, but if people wanted to go online and learn more, maybe just your top 3.
Well, I would go to the Center for Disease, go to CDC ACE study, wealth of information. I would go to the Harvard Developing Child, and there's videos and lots of information there. SAMHSA is not bad either, but I would go to Florida Courts. My third one would be floridacourts.org, to the Trauma Toolkit, and you'll find everything that you need if I were to pick only 3.
Perfect. So I think, Kelly, if you don't mind, if I ask you to go ahead and unmute the folks that we have who are on the work group, then we can go ahead.
Am I doing that?
You are not on mute. We had some of our listeners on mute. If you don't mind, while Kelly's doing that, we do have another question asking for recommendations for providing trauma-based services for teens or children who are so traumatized and unstable that they can't stay in one placement and continue to run and refuse therapy.
Yeah, it's very, very tough. Unfortunately, ideally, if sometimes they're usually picking up charges, and if you have a trauma-informed detention center, you can at least begin some services so that they'll be open-minded to it. That's what we have found. Locally, we had a person who was so good at it, he's now been elevated to make all of the juvenile detention centers in Central Florida trauma-informed, and we do trauma assessments. It's such a, and all of the by the way, all of our staff there are trauma informed. They're there cheering the kids, saying, "You can do this. I know you can do this." We have a PhD education person who is very individualized, who makes the education experience difference. And we also have some yoga there sometimes. We have all sorts of innovative things. That, if you have a detention centers like that, our kids ask to stay there. And we've had several children that agreed with counsel and everything to stay until we could find, for instance, there are some programs for trafficked youth in the state. The Grove is one of those, and you don't have to have as long as you're cooperating with law enforcement. The Grove is in kind of north central Florida, I believe. It's considered a SIP placement, but it's also considered appropriate for victims of trafficked individuals, which if they've been running, chances are they have been. UBC, I believe in Orlando is closing. That was the best, but they have other sites in the state, is an excellent placement for children. But of course we have to hold them just enough to get the SIP assessment done, and then sometimes they're running, but we try to do an overlap through HEADS therapy, HEADS, healing, educational arts for deserving students in 15 different counties. And if they're briefly at least at school or in a home, they will come and visit with them, even sometimes multiple times a week, enough to get them going. The Pasco Kids First, which is our community, our children's advocacy center, if you can get them to rush something before somebody starts running, they will try counseling. However, they will not force a child to do counseling, which is often the problem. And as long as you know when you're ready, let us know. And I've had children finally come back and go, okay, I'm ready, I will do it. But the consistency is very important. There is no magic answer to this except continuing to assure them that they deserve a better life, that you're worried about them. I educate children, our JDC does, on the risks of somebody trafficking you, even somebody you know. And our sheriff's office has become very, very proactive in prosecuting people for trafficking, prosecuting them for harboring a minor, interfering with custody. I know that's not a simple answer, but that's the best that I can give you. Just keep letting them know you care, because that's what, like the Thomas that I showed you, he used to run all the time. The foster parents, the adoptive parents of the little girl told me, he told us how you always told him you were worried about him, that you always reminded him that you hoped he wouldn't run, that you would stay. It sinks in. What you say matters. It's not a great answer, but it's the best I can give you.
Thank you, Judge. It looks like we have a comment from Brenda. She mentions about she feels it's important that our kids work with mentors. The more positive connections they have, the better. She said she's had quite a few mentors give her very critical information because they're spending a lot of time with the children, and they're also observing the dynamics in the foster home as well.
I couldn't stress mentors enough. I consider a guardian ad litem to be like a mentor, but I know a mentor is there every week. Boys and Girls Club can be the form of a mentor or coach, but if we have a true mentors program in your area, embrace it. Bring them on board. Absolutely, that would be wonderful.
Okay, well, I think we have gotten through all the typed in questions. So unless, Kelly, you see anything else that I have not found, I think we're going to take a minute now and go ahead and pause here. We'll allow everyone in listen mode to go ahead and have this be the conclusion of the presentation portion of the call, and I will ask the 15 members of the Trauma-Informed Advocacy Work Group to stay on the line and continue with sort of a mini meeting with Judge Tepper that will go until 3:30. So Kelly, if you could make the adjustments that you need to make with regard to how that's recorded, that would be wonderful. And I just want to acknowledge all the people that took time out of their day to call in for this important topic, and I know you found it useful, and I'm grateful for your attention. So thank you for calling in, and if the members of the Trauma-Informed Advocacy Work Group would remain on the line for a second, Kelly will tell us when we can continue.
And thank you to everybody that is a guardian ad litem volunteer. Thank you. It makes a difference. I'm sure you've had the experience of children reaching out to you years after their case is closed. You clearly were a nurturing relationship. Thank you for your voluntary service.
Thank you, Judge. Okay, Kelly, do you feel like we're good?
Yes, most of the attendees in the large group are signing off little by little, so you do still have the core group on. I've unmuted the ones that I'm able to, but we do still have some that are remaining on self-mute, which is fine. So if you'd like to continue on the conversation, you are able to do so.
Okay, perfect. So what Kelly is saying about the mute, and anyone who wants to continue to listen, that's wonderful. We just wanted to sort of move from presentation format to more informal discussion. So if you want, we had everyone on mute for the purposes of the presentation, but if you want to just leave your phone on mute if you're not talking, that will help, but feel free to jump in. So we have about 15 or 20 minutes that I just wanted I think we have about 15 people on the line to just sort of pause and maybe ask some questions of Judge Tepper that are directly relevant to the work that this group will be responsible for. So our charge is to make specific recommendations with regard to guardian ad litem policies, training, practices. I have a couple questions written down, but I'm gonna defer to people on the group to sort of jump in and use this time with Judge Tepper to maybe help us get some of that, get some of our work moving, and just make sure that we're incorporating the things that are being seen from the bench and from a courtroom perspective specifically into the work that we're doing. So with that, I'll just open up the floor and you guys please jump in.
Can anyone hear me?
Yes. I
Hi
hear
there.
you.
This is Eva Sugg, one of the attorneys in the 19th Judicial Circuit. Thank you for such a fantastic presentation.
Thank you.
Mind-blowing, especially the information on substance abuse. I had not considered that information previously. My question is, how did your court transition to a trauma-informed court with the use of a child-friendly waiting area and the techniques that you have implemented in your courtroom?
Well, I'd actually say it was gradual. Number one, I have sat in other divisions over the years, but half of my time probably about, for instance, do you do the dependency court improvement meetings? About, I don't know, maybe 7, 8 years ago, at one of those meetings, we were asked, they said, judges, look, you're killing our case managers. They got enough to do. Why do you make them sit in court all day? And I had over the years toyed with, I experiment with time certain dockets. They said, could you please make them time certain dockets? And I said, I'll try it. And it worked. And then as I got educated in trauma-informed practices and how having people, nothing like putting somebody who has mental health problems has to sit around with, 40 other people in a waiting room and maybe sees their past walking in. I'm like, oh my God, this is a much better way to go. And so I started the time certain docket. So for instance, we might, and we've tweaked it over the years. I always ask for input. I always have meetings with the key players, the guardian ad litem's office, the child welfare attorneys, the parents' attorneys, and the case managers, and go, what would you like to change? And so, like for instance, we said, well, let's set aside a time for an hour for arraignments on for the two attorneys, each week, so that we know we can always just set them on that. We won't be stepping on anybody's toes. And then I go into great detail and explain it so that was, information is also helpful so that people aren't afraid. And so we developed that. And then we agreed that we needed to have times after 3 o'clock when children who wanted to come wouldn't be missing school. And so we'd set them for time certain. So often we'd reserve a 4 or 4:30 for them. And then we, so that was very important. And as to for instance, a child waiting area, about 15 years ago, on one of the renovations at our courthouse, way back when the guardian ad litem came out from the umbrella of the Supreme Court, they were thrown out of the courthouse. So I had a little office. I go, hey, I'd like to take this as a children's waiting area. I'd been to Miami where they had a super duper children's waiting area. And so I got a juvenile who had community service to do to come in and paint murals in that, and my judicial assistant supervisor. And nobody could afford furniture, so we brought plastic milk carton things in to hold the books. And my judicial assistant and I would pick up books at yard sales and things like that. We actually, 12 years ago, were recognized by the then Chief Justice for our work on books. And then there was a newspaper article about that. And next thing I knew, our community embraced, and they decided they would give them stuffed animals. We have bags and boxes of books that are brought in every month by people. The 4-H club, one of them, I go out every year, and the little kids have cleaned out their closets and they're giving me things. And so I started buying bookcases or asking court administration for bookcases, and we're putting them in there. And my bailiff is a master of Beanie Babies. The kids will come and say, hey, I heard you give out really good Beanie Babies. Now that's a trauma-informed approach when you've got law enforcement doing that. It's not that he's unsafe. And then as I got an education, I remember I was getting educated in trauma-informed stuff I was doing visitation, an attachment with Dr. Mimi Graham around the state about 7 years ago. And she introduced me to ACE study. And I'm like, oh, wow, who knew? And then I was connected with the National Council of Children and Family Court Judges. And I was urged by then retired Judge Jim Seals, who was on the board, to apply for one of these Project One courts. So then they educated me, and then they would bring technical assistance. And I've had 2, and you can get it done, by the way, in your courthouse. Office of State Court Administrators are now capable of doing this. we used to call them trauma audits, are now called a trauma assessment. They came for a couple of days. They met with my stakeholders. They met with my case managers, attorneys. They walked through, they sat in court, had meetings, went out to detention center, and told me what I was doing right and what I was doing wrong. And I thought I knew a lot, and it was an eye opener. And we've continued to improve with that. The other thing is, because I've been around for so long and I have always been open to hearing from people, I get letters 15 years after the fact telling me, by the way, Judge, thank you for your encouragement. Thank you. That made a difference. And as I retired and I gathered all these things, I recognized that the consistency in 34 years, because I was a county judge too, was you listened to me, you were kind, and you made me think I could accomplish something. And so that doesn't take any special training. That just means that it's not adversarial. Yeah, I can try a case. I can try a good case. But the reality is, by encouraging our attorneys not to be adversarial, by spending a lot of time explaining things, to parents, the parents don't want to go to trial. And so you get rid of that adversarial matter. And I know that's a real problem for lawyers. And so if we have 2 trials a year, that's a lot of trials. I know that's hard to believe. And I have, at any given time, anywhere from 185 to 235 cases open. And that's, like 685 kids. And so that has made a difference in educating, again, bringing people on board to educate them. So it's been a process, and we're changing and improving. And I was blessed to have a trauma-informed detention center already with somebody who cared and wanted to improve things. So that helped. And somebody wanted to bring on our former guardian ad litem attorney, retired, and she started the therapy dog program. Does that answer? Does that help?
Yes, thank you.
And it doesn't take money. And one other thing I would point out was, a couple of years ago, I was asked to moderate a national presentation on the children's advocacy centers, and they told me something about them. And so I turned to our ASCO Kids First and said, gee, I didn't know anything about that. And they go, Judge, we're one of those. We do that. I go, really? Well, next thing I know, I was teaching it, and I didn't know we have these resources, and shame on me. So you just never know what's in your community. Next.
Judge Tepper, one of our committee members does have a question. Eric, I'm showing that you're not muted. Do you want to try to speak to see if we can hear you? And then if not, if you want to type your question or statement in the chat box, I'll read it out loud.
Can you all hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. You're there.
All right, then it's just a user error on my computer. Cool. My question was about the trauma assessments. Your earlier slide talked about not being the CBHAs. We actually have a really great judge who's very trauma-informed and is definitely pushing this. But when she says, I want a trauma assessment done on the child, or when we ask for it in one of our other counties, we get blank stares from child protective investigators, case managers, CLS attorneys. They look at us like a deer in the headlights. So how did you overcome that and kind of inform your local community-based agencies and your providers and your case management so that they knew, that these assessments existed and how you got them to be used on a day-to-day basis?
I always asked for, I found out I had to ask for credentials. It used to be that a program seemed to be trauma-informed, but then they would hire people that were not credentials. And when I started getting I'd hear of somebody coming into the home to work with 3-year-olds, and they'd sit on the couch and talk to them and not do play therapy and stuff. I'm like, what is this person's credentials? I get the credentials, and I would go to Vicki Hummer, is with the Tampa Bay Crisis Center, and I would send her a resume, or I'd send it up to Dr. Mimi Graham. I go, this person, they studied library science, and this doesn't seem like this is appropriate. And so then or when I'd ask for one and I'd get that back, they'd call my office and go, I'll be happy to do a trauma assessment if you'll tell me what that is. Well, I knew they didn't know what they were doing. I then also got locally you could try to get your CBC. That probably won't work. I got DJJ to do it. I got some dependency money to do it. And we had Vicki Hummer do some train the trainer. And it's not easy to get somebody to do it. If you have a children's services board, get somebody that's skilled like Vicki Hummer to come in and do it's almost like a train the trainer on how to do an assessment. And she said, and you don't have to be, and to do and include doing an ACE survey. That's the real answer. And the Children's Services Board, I think, would be happy to do that for you if you have it. We don't have one yet. I hope we'll get one. And just say, I need to know the credentials. I need to see this. And you might also ask, I would ask our Children's Advocacy Center, who would you recommend to do this? And they usually know the links as well in the other county. That's how we start. We often start with the Children's Advocacy Board in that county. But if they have a blank stare, obviously they're not the ones to do it. Does that help in any way?
Yes, thank you.
More?
Are there other questions for the judge? Okay, well, I'll throw mine out there and see and then I'll come back and check with people again. So I've been studying the materials that you've been sending since you and I have been working on this for a month, for about a week, looking, in detail at the different, articles and, priorities and that sort of thing. And I feel like there's a parallel between what you did and what we are trying to do, in that there are a number of different constituents within the Guardian Ad Litem program, different parts that have to be changed. We'll have our volunteers, we have our staff, we have our training, we have our standards. In the same way that you had a lot of moving pieces that you wanted to see change to become more trauma informed in your courtroom. As you look back on how it came about and the successes that you had, do you have any big picture thoughts about how you would initiate that change from an organizational perspective to make it efficient and effective?
Well, sometimes you have non-believers, and sometimes the non-believer is the judge. And ideally, they should see webinars like this. Go see a court you all can get to that's trauma informed. And sometimes we've even had people appear from other circuits by video to get an idea. We've had people from other states come and watch to get an idea, and they go, yeah, I can do that. And sometimes just seeing it and then talking to your contemporaries in there. In other words, let me talk to the attorney in that circuit and see what they would suggest we try to do. That's very helpful. Get the state, OSCA, Office of State Court Improvement, to do a trauma assessment, and they'll tell you what some of your missing pieces are. When I got the first assessment, I walked the courthouse with some child welfare people and my domestic violence shelter folks and said, okay, yeah, well, let's change this. Okay, you're right. We can do this. We can do that. We can do that. And nobody wanted to pay anything. So, okay, fine. We'll make a sign out of paper. We'll do this. We'll do that. Let's put a little sticker on here. Let's do this. And that helped a great deal in terms of how to best get started. Does that help?
Yes, it does.
A different answer.
No, that's a great answer. And it's interesting because I feel like we are starting by gathering the information and pulling out what we believe are the most important parts. But I think the suggestion to look at some of the circuits that really are already well along their way in terms of a trauma-informed approach, things that they think just come second nature, may really inform the sort of things that we want to have, after we've completed this. So that's a great idea. Thank you.
And look at ones of similar sizes and resources, by the way.
Right. Does anyone else have a question or comment, want to have any further discussion before we lose Judge Tepper? Okay, well, as always, if anyone thinks of a comment or a question, you're welcome to email me. You're welcome to email Kelly. I am really excited about all the information that we got today and how we can apply it to what we're doing moving forward. So I just want to thank you again, Judge Tepper. You put a ton of work into this, and I'm so grateful to you for tailoring it specifically to guardian ad litem. I think we had close to 100 callers. So if anybody was in a room together, that may be even more people. So hopefully, we're planting this seed and it will start to grow. And we will certainly keep you posted. I will definitely send you the final product of what the guardian ad litem program comes up with to make.
Excellent. And would you also send me a list, because I sent you so many documents, of what you ended up with that you'll be able to share? Because I want to make sure they also got the ABA child law practice. I think I sent that to you a week or so ago, because the attorneys may find that particularly helpful.
I believe you did send that. I was reading one of those today. So
Okay.
I will send you a list and you can confirm, and we will make all of those materials available to people on our website. And we are also, once we get a little bit further down the road, we'll begin publicizing these educational materials in a systematic way so that our volunteers can access them at any time. And we'll also be making the materials available to attorneys ad litem that are not affiliated with the program, so that if they want to learn more, they can also become trauma informed.
Well, I'm so glad that you and Alan want to start a revolution.
Judge Tepper, this is Alan Abramowitz.
Hi, Alan. I was hoping you were on.
Yeah, I really appreciate your leadership. We do want to be identified as a trauma-informed agency. We see that this has to be throughout everything we do, and it's really because of your leadership down there in early childhood court, and so many others in Florida that really want to make sure we understand what's going on with these kids. So we do it right. So I appreciate it.
Thank you for the opportunity, Alan. I'm just thrilled that you and Deb have been putting this together. This is really quite remarkable. Thank you for the opportunity. And I don't mind any further questions that come through by email or whatever. Okay?
Oh, thank you for offering that. That's wonderful.
All right.
All right, everyone, we're right at 3:30, so we will conclude.
I can't believe we did it with our full start. I'm sorry I made you do this.
That is.
Thank you, Deb.
It
Thank
was
you, Alan.
wonderful. Thanks, everyone. Thank you.
I know.
Yeah.
Thank you, John.